Okay, so I'm certainly very disappointed to hear that Terence Crawford won't be fighting Errol Spence next. He'll instead be facing David Avanesian. And of course, Crawford and Spence are blaming each other for this fight not happening next. Terence Crawford says he agreed to all of Team Spence's BS, if I can quote him here. So Terence Crawford said, yeah, I was really looking forward to the Errol Spence fight. I started communicating with Al Heyman and PBC back in June. And unfortunately, they represent a fighter in Errol Spence who didn't want the fight as bad as I did. Went on to say I agreed to all of their BS and they've been dragging their you-know-what for months. Spence was nowhere to be found while I was trying to make the deal. I explained to Al Heyman and Errol that I was going to fight before the end of the year. David Avanesian is a very tough task. He's knocked out his last 6 opponents. And this guy is dangerous. Once I'm successful against Avanesian, my plan is still the same, to whoop Errol Spence. So Spence responded with the following. He said, I don't know who Avanesian is. I've done everything that I said I was going to do, and I'll fight him next, and we'll see who is holding the fight up. Everyone sees now who is holding the fight up. He had this Avanesian guy, I guess, in his back pocket. So yeah, that's the response from Errol Spence. So they're both blaming each other. Now, I've heard some other stuff, which I can't confirm here, but this is what I've heard. People have been discussing certain tweets that have been put out by journalists and whatever. But some people are claiming that Terence Crawford agreed to only 35% of the revenue split, and he wanted to see exactly, how the income of the fight would be divvied up, how it would be divided up and distributed to who. So he wanted more transparency with regards to the finances of the fight. As part of agreeing to only getting 35%, he wanted a bit more transparency. And because that transparency wasn't provided, supposedly, that's why he hasn't agreed and the fight hasn't gone ahead. Now, make it out what you will. Do you call that Terence Crawford ducking? Do you call that Errol Spence ducking? I mean, you could take the position that Terence Crawford had to take the deal that was on the table because what is he now, 35 years of age? If he wants to play a waiting game, time is not on his side. Errol Spence is several years younger than he is. So as much as you might not like the deal, if there's only like one rematch or whatever, you're not going to be tied into anything long term, and you're happy with the rematch terms, then you might have to bite the bullet and take it, because what's the alternative? Is Terence Crawford in a better position now that the Spence fight has fallen through for the time being than he would have been if he'd just taken the offer that was on the table? That's what you have to ask yourself. So forget about the fact that it's not the ideal offer. Are you in a better position not taking it? Again, considering the fact that you're, 35 years of age. You don't have a load of time to wait for a better deal. Do you know what I mean? So that's one position that some people could take. But there's something I will say, and that is the fact that, generally speaking, the boxing industry or the boxing establishment don't like independent fighters. And as it stands right now, Terence Crawford is still independent. He hasn't signed, as far as I'm aware, any kind of long-term promotional deal with PBC or anyone else. It appears as though he was looking to just fight Errol Spence on a 1 or 2 fight deal, whatever, and then weigh up his options after that. The industry generally doesn't like fighters doing that because the networks don't get to control the fighter and make money out of them long term. The promoters don't get to do that. And it's not only that, but it's also the fact that it may encourage other fighters to do the same. You see, it sets a precedent. Now, of course, there are outliers like Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather before him, Miguel Cotto towards the end of his career, where they were moving between different broadcasters and what have you. But that's because they had built up such a high value before becoming independent, before being outside of a long-term promotional deal or TV deal, that they'd moved themselves into a power position whereby they can dictate and say, hey, I want this and I want that, and I'm not going to sign with you for more than 1 or 2 fights, etc., etc. Most boxers are not going to be allowed to do that. If they try to move between different networks, the promoter that they primarily work with is going to get upset and say, oh, you're not welcome back on, my platform or my network if you try and move around and all this kind of stuff. Maybe they'll make the odd exception, but they don't want every boxer moving around like Canelo Alvarez all the time. Picking and choosing where they want their fights and which promoter they don't want that, because that introduces I guess, instability for the networks in terms of the business side of things and for the promoters as well. They want to lock these fighters into long-term contracts. And by the way, you can hear people like Roy Jones, who was kind of an independent fighter for a long time in his career, and he spoke about how the industry doesn't like fighters being independent. Terence Crawford, of course, as I say, is at the moment independent, and perhaps that's why he's getting this deal that maybe isn't as good as the one he should be getting, because he's an independent fighter. Maybe because he won't commit to a multi-fight deal. Maybe because in the minds of the TV executives or whoever, he's got the audacity to try and act like he's a Canelo Alvarez or whatever, when he's never done those kind of numbers. And Terence Crawford is not some big pay-per-view superstar. So again, from the perspective of the execs and whatever, I imagine that's how they're looking at him and saying, look, if this guy's not going to commit to us long-term, yeah, we'll give him some joke of a contract to sign. So what do you do with that? If you're Terence Crawford, do you stand on your square? Because if you beat Errol Spence, that's where the payoff comes. It may not come during the Spence fights, but it will come afterwards, where you can then say, hey, I'm the man in the division. I beat the guy twice. Somebody give me a good deal for my next fight. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about the situation. Again, it's disappointing. Hopefully, if Terence Crawford gets past his next fight, which he should really, against Avanesyan, then they can sort the situation out for 2023, and we'll get to see the fight we've all been looking for. Maybe some people are of the mind that Spence is looking to wait it out because he knows that Crawford is getting older by, well, everyone's getting older by the minute, right? But he understands that the longer he waits, the better it might be for him, because Crawford might be slower over the next few years. You have to imagine that Crawford has probably already peaked. Maybe he's over the crest of the hill at this point. How far? We don't know. But at 35 years of age, how many welterweights do you know that were at their absolute best? Some people say Mayweather was still very good at 35. Yeah, but he wasn't at his peak. So, yeah. Let me know all your views in the comment section below.